Alrighty, I think we should get going. We have a critical mass in our audience is still increasing, so we'll get a slow roll here. I'm Amy Longsworth. I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Green Ribbon Commission, and I want to welcome everyone to the second of our webinars, particularly focused and designed for trustees of institutions, cultural institutions, educational institutions. We want to help bring along trustees and our cultural institutions members in climate action planning. So thank you for joining us. And November 3rd was our first webinar designed for trustees, and we focused on climate risk. And you'll recall we had two governance and risk experts from Ceres talking about climate risk for institutions, how to think about it, where it sits on the board, which committees. And what we're going to talk about today is how to begin to mitigate that risk by planning for it. And we have a really great set of panelists with us. It's a unique approach we take. It's been very successful so far. So we're going to get to it. I will say this webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link to the recording so you can share it with colleagues who couldn't make it today. The chat is open, so please put any questions you have in the chat. And yeah, I think that's it. Let's go to the agenda. So we're going to hear, after I stop talking, we will hear from Gwill York, who is known to many of you and has served in multiple roles on multiple cultural institutions boards in Boston and elsewhere. Dallase Scott will then give us an explanation of the Climate Action Planning Program, which is the heart of what we're talking about here. We have four participants sharing their stories. So participants mean people who have gone through this year-long program and are about to graduate. And their stories are really, really interesting and exciting. And then Dallase, again, will come back on and talk about sort of why this works. Finally, at about 9:30, we'll get to a moderated discussion with you all. So again, questions go into the chat. We're paying attention to that and picking them up as we go along. Next slide. So the Boston Green Ribbon Commission is an organization, nonprofit, made up of institutional leaders in Boston. And we include a cultural institutions working group. We also have a healthcare working group, a higher ed working group, and a commercial real estate working group. So this particular working group is wonderful and unique in that culturals are creative, willing to try things, and you bring so much to the city of Boston. You're absolutely crucial. We need to make sure you've all got climate action plans. And you speak to audiences. You're well respected. People look to you for leadership. And for all of these reasons, we're really excited to be working with all of you across the board, from sports organizations to museums and everyone in between. And we very much want to bring this sector along, participating actively with Boston Climate Action. Next slide. Our moderators and speakers, I introduced myself, I introduced Gwill. Dallase is the founder and principal of her own group called Trust, which really has roots in the education sector. She's worked with multiple universities and is now bringing her moderating skills to the cultural world. Next slide. And our four panelists, I will let them introduce themselves, other than to say thank you again for doing this with us. And they're all they're about to graduate, except for Paul. I misspoke. He's our alum. He went through the climate action program with the Museum of Science last year. And so Ben Havoc is with Historic New England, Jennifer Lamy is with Emerson College, Josh Meyer with Zoo New England, and Paul Ippolito with the Museum of Science, Boston. And with those notes, I will turn it over to Gwill to share some perspective as an experienced cultural trustee.
Great. Thank you, Amy, and thank you for the panelists and all of you joining us today. As some of you may know, I've had the privilege of being the chair of the Museum of Science and work closely with Paul, and Paul is very kind to continue to smile at me because we've been on this journey for, I'd say, a decade. And then I'm also now the chair of the Gardner Museum, very different institutions. But I I'm here to welcome you all to be on your journey as trustees and as directors, to know that there is quite a bit of fiduciary responsibility as it comes to climate work at this moment, and want to thank the GRC for coming up with this collaborative method, because I think that working together and having people share ideas and know that there's great support is very important to this kind of work, because it seems challenging and scary. So there are many ways to address the scariness and this uncertainty about what we're trying to do. And obviously board members need to be involved in supporting the development of a climate action plan, approving it, ensuring that it's implemented, and including resources. So I just want to say that trustee level support can unlock the climate action. Everyone is waiting for someone in the organization to give them the green light. And it can come from the staff, but it can come also from the trustees. And it just takes one trustee to say, boy, this sounds like a lot of risk. Is audit on this? I hope so. And is the audit committee and is the board on it? So this is very important. And once trustees start asking their organizations what's going on in action, climate action, and how they can support it, it becomes an amazing supportive catalyst for the staff to do the work, and have it be an interaction between the staff and the trustees to share this great responsibility. So thinking about climate planning as we're all responsible for the risk and we have to reduce it. It's a tool for organizational change and an opportunity to engage the staff broadly. Most staff members really want to dig into this work for their cultural organizations. They understand they're responsible for their buildings, their collection, and just for the greater good. So what you will hear today is exciting and creative institution-specific results of the work from 3 of our collaborative cohort, and led by Dallase Scott, who's been our theory of change and organizer extraordinaire. Once you hear her talk, you'll want to bring her into all your meetings, no matter what you're talking about. So I've really enjoyed watching these plans develop with the various organizations. And as a trustee and as an executive director of one of our cultural organizations, I want you to think about when your organization is going to join one of our cohorts, and look forward. We're now recruiting for our next group that's going to start in the fall, and really need to get everyone through the program as quickly as possible. And I want to thank some of the people, some of the trustees on the call. I just want to give you a shout out. I know you're very quiet about this, but from 10 different organizations, 10 trustees have given us a little bit of money to allow us to run these cohorts. So I want to thank you again. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dallase.
Thank you so much, Gwill, and Amy, for the introduction. I am really excited about today. It is such a fun opportunity to share about the program and to highlight our participants in the program today. So next slide, please. One of the most fun pieces about doing this work is the collaborative framework. You'll see logos of the institutions who have participated in the last 2 years and have shared their insights and have learned together. And we'll talk a little bit more about what exactly is the program and the timing and the expectations of those who do participate in the program. Next slide. We're all here because the city of Boston has a plan to be carbon neutral. And we have many other players in the city beyond what the city owns, its own municipality buildings. And so it's going to take many different industries, many different people coming together to adapt and think about mobility and waste reduction, and all the important things to be carbon neutral, and doing this in a way where we're designing for equity along the way. And the big question is, how are we going to do this? And one of the answers is we can't do it just one at a time. We have to move faster. 2050 is around the corner. A lot of these milestones that you see at the top are quite literally already within probably your fiscal budgeting planning process. So you really got to make the move now. And if we go to the next slide, we talk about this opportunity that came up. So the Boston Green Ribbon Commission wanted to think about this planning process as cohorts, as a way to utilize the strengths of some of our industry leaders here, technical expertise, and individuals like myself that like to manage these type of processes, and think about the pedagogy of changing, shifting an organization to take climate action. And the idea is, if we do it within a group, not only is it an opportunity for reaching multiple institutions with the same amount of resources, but there's actually this really amazing benefit of the collaboration and co-learning that happens. So here's a little bit about by the numbers. The program is 9 months. This is actually some refinement from our previous 2 years, which used to be a 12-month program, but we've learned that we can do it in 9 months. It really requires at least one dedicated staff member to be at all of the cohort meetings, which we'll cover in a bit. We find, and there'll be examples here today, where some organizations have more than one staff member that show up and be a part of that. We have 8 cohort work sessions, and on top of those, we also have these kind of milestone and checkpoints. This involves a kickoff, a summit where we share our drafts, and also sort of our end of the year celebration. So this could be you, and this is what it would look like. There's very limited cost on your end. In fact, the program itself is free, but we do want to recognize that future investigations or things that you find yourself looking more into would require funding down the road. But really, the Green Ribbon Commission is coming with the project management, technical expertise within mitigation, adaptation, and climate justice are to the table. And we have lots of materials that we have put together and curated for you. So we'll go to the next slide here. So what does it look like? Every month, our cohort members show up, and there is a deep dive in specific areas in regards to the pathways to develop a climate action plan and the important steps along the way. So in those meetings, you'll see you'll have the representatives from each of the programs showing up, learning, talking, sharing, and getting templates on how to do different steps of the process. And if you go to the next slide, they bring it back to their organization with the important stakeholders that they need to involve to ensure that they have a climate action plan at the end of the day that's implemented. So they're talking to the important stakeholders within facilities, or within programming, or within finance, and to share what they're learning and to bring them along, and also providing just a really helpful, informative education program to their organization about why climate action is important, and specifically how the organization can invest in the mitigation, resilience, and climate justice piece of this work. So there's a lot of learning from our direct members, but also peer learning when they bring it back to their organization. Next slide, please. here's our little Gantt chart of our time together. So, it is mostly remote. And we learned this, we tried it out because of the pandemic, and it really has turned out to be a great way to keep people engaged for that 9-month period. We're all very busy. It's hard to all meet and take the travel time to get there. So we have a very engaging and interactive framework that's on Zoom. And you'll see here, we have these specific steps along the way. At the top, you'll see the groundwork, which is organizing the planning process and securing leadership. And that's why we're here with you as trustees, because across the board, everyone we've worked with that have said what would really make a difference is getting that investment from the top of the organization. So that's our first step, because we know it's the most important step in order for implementation at the end of the day, because we're not here just to create climate action plans. Our goal is that these organizations implement them after they've developed their plan. So each one of the little icons of the Zoom are when we meet. There's that little tail afterwards, which is opportunities for people to go back in their organization and do some of the homework and the stakeholder building that is necessary for success. We also hold office hours as needed for institutions that might have some follow-up questions that are very specific to their organization. Next slide, please. And then we have resources that we've spent a good amount of time putting together, and it's all on a website here, and it's all accessible online. So next slide. We have our website with little icons that can push to exactly the meetings we're in. We record the sessions in case life happens and you miss a meeting, you can still catch up. Or with one of our, Josh will share today, if you're brought in halfway through the process, you can catch up also. And we have just bullet pointed best practices and templates that really help bring people through the process. Next slide. And really it's about learning, workshopping, engaging and reflecting, and then we iterate and we build upon it. And if you go to the next slide, not only are we doing this internally with ourselves, but we're doing it together. And that really amplifies the impact. There's an example where Paul talked about a presentation that he gave to some of his senior leaders, and a few other people were like, ooh, I'm going to borrow that idea. That sounded like it really works. So we leapfrog and we learn and we iterate faster when we do it together. Next slide. Yeah, so I'll end with this final quote here before we pass it on to one of our participants today. But we really hope you think about joining for this cohort, and we'll leave it to our members here to share more about their personal experience. So I'll pass it to you, Ben.
Great. You could advance the slide. My name's Ben Havoc. I'm the team leader for property care for Historic New England. Property care is basically the equivalent of like a buildings and grounds department, but it's complicated. Next slide. So I'm here representing Historic New England. We're a regional heritage organization. We have many different program areas, and we're in 5 New England states doing activities. So this was kind of a big undertaking for us to kind of wrap our heads around climate action planning. Please advance. Just some statistics, kind of our major focal point out in the public is 41 historic properties across 5 New England states. We also have a 8-story collection storage facility. We have 125,000 objects, so historic objects, either at the houses themselves or in that storage facility, as well as 1.5 million items of archival material. We also happen to hold easements on private property, protecting historic architecture and landscape features. So that's about 120 easements. And we welcome 168,000 visitors last year in the kind of post-COVID years. So things are looking up for us. Next slide, please. This is just an example. I said it was buildings and grounds. These are kind of my properties that I'm overseeing. It's a wide range of historic buildings from the 17th century to the 20th century, 1938 Walter Gropius House. Of course, the land itself has been occupied for thousands of years before European settlement. So we have quite a bit of kind of cultural resources to manage. Next slide. And that's kind of the core of my job, is actually preservation of these properties and their landscapes. And so we're trying to kind of interpret them to a specific period in time, like the pictures on the left showing Roseland Cottage in Connecticut, historic current. But then I also have to take care of the objects inside the houses. So that means kind of capital improvements to the environmental systems as sensitively as possible, so that we can kind of mitigate the environment and make it as friendly for the objects as well. And then, of course, that extends to collection storage and archival storage as well. Next slide, please. So some more statistics. It's 167 structures that we're taking care of. You know, that's 700,000 square feet. Like I said, it's across 5 New England states, so it's regionally spread out. 72 heating plants, 108 different utility accounts, and we have 1,300 acres of land. So some of that is managed and some of that is meadows and woodland. Please advance. So, they asked me to kind of speak to a couple themes about engaging and why we engaged in this process. And I would say it was very timely for me. We were no strangers to, you know, the effects of climate on our properties. We have what I like to think of as a robust emergency preparedness program. We think about it constantly. We respond to emergencies, and then we plan out what we might be able to do to mitigate that. So again, we do a lot of tree care. We have focused on stormwater management over the years, but we knew things were getting worse and worse. And we actually did a study of gutters in the state of Maine. We have 8 properties in Maine, and we looked at carrying capacity of those gutters and realized that our historic gutters were not carrying water today. And we were kind of thinking about the future of climate change, and we were like, oh, they're actually not carrying in storms today. So we've been thinking about it, but what I really lacked, I was trying to, how do you pull it all together? And I was really struggling with kind of pulling it into a cohesive plan. I had what I called a framework, but it was very disparate. I didn't have buy-in across the organization. I didn't really know how to pull it together. Please advance. So timeliness of the process. Also, I got a letter from the city of Boston that told me all of a sudden I had to start reporting on this 20,000 square foot facility in Boston, the Otis House. Somehow I missed all of that going on. This is the Barreto, the Boston emissions reduction something. But you all know what it is. And all of a sudden I was like, I have to start thinking about utilities and what we're going to do at this facility to decrease the carbon load. Please advance. And then, of course, Massachusetts started passing similar legislation, or at least discussing it. And I have other facilities across the state, including the 8-story collections storehouse. And frankly, historic house museums, as we all know, and art storage, not known for being carbon friendly. So I was like, oh my gosh, I really have to start wrapping my head around this. Please advance. I will also say I'm a member of the executive committee for an organization called COSTEP Massachusetts. It's a coordinated statewide emergency preparedness group for specifically for cultural resources. And if you're not a member, a little shout out, you should become a member. But we had been tied into the Green Ribbon Commission and what they had been working on. And I had a colleague who had attended the report out from, I think, the first cohort. And she actually just called me up individually and said, Ben, this is what you've been waiting for. This is what you need to sign up for. And so I signed up for the second year cohort, or at least I queried saying maybe I'm interested. Please advance. And so this is a slightly different chart than what Dallase showed. This was our chart. And I was very hesitant about the workload, of course, because we had actually already started our annual plan for the year. This was not part of the annual plan. I actually kind of slotted thinking about climate change in a formal way, actually a couple of years from now. But again, taking advantage of the opportunities. And so I was looking and I met with Dallase and we discussed it, and I was really concerned about workload, but everything was kind of laid out so well and so organized. I said, well, what's the worst that could happen? It feels like we can kind of work our way through this process. And so we signed up. Please advance. So just speaking of institutional engagement, I'll just note that I am a member of kind of the executive leadership of Historic New England, this what we call the leadership team. So I did have early kind of conceptual buy-in that this was the right thing and everyone was on board. I'm also a staff liaison to what is kind of the equivalent of a buildings and grounds committee. And so I presented early on to them. They encouraged me to kind of leave it as a standing agenda item and to continue the discussion. But I will say we knew we had a weakness, and that's this was again out of the normal planning cycle for Historic New England. I didn't have a robust team made up of people from other divisions, but I did have several members of my team that I said, I think we should all go to this and work on this together. So the weakness in our process was that it was very property care focused, very buildings and grounds focused, and we knew there was much more robust things we could be talking about. And so so what happened though is once we got kind of our legs under us, we began planning some staff brainstorming sessions. And when we finally had those, the reception was quite positive. We had 42% of our full-time staff participate in these brainstorming sessions. And this was just a phenomenal number as for a volunteer, you know, like sign up, no one's making you come to this meeting. And it was very exciting. And if you please advance, it's allowed us to kind of shift from this kind of property care focused mold to what we call the Climate Action Staff Advisory Group, of which we have representatives from across the organization, all kind of talking and thinking about the process and going out to their respective teams and kind of, again, discussing it. And I've gone back to leadership teams several times and we're charting out a course for actually the Board of Trustees and when we're actually going to sign on to the climate action plan with them. Please advance. The final slide I have is to discuss kind of funding synergies. And really early in this process, we had been working with the GRC cohort for a couple months, but we had reached out to a foundation actually about something else. And they said, well, I'm really interested in kind of energy efficiency and resiliency. And I, of course, had taken enough of Dallase's classes with the technical advisors to really speak the language and really dive deep. And what this converted to is because we are all doing this kind of as our normal jobs, adding to the normal jobs, we've actually were able to secure the funding for 2 years of a position, sustainability coordinator position for our organization, who is also now spearheading this fully funded project at this farm down in Rhode Island, which is already an organic farm. So we already call this sustainable, but it's to develop a carbon neutral plan for this farm. So we're very excited because also, you know, this work was able to convert almost immediately into positive funding for us. And with that, I will stop my component. I believe I'm passing it on to Jennifer.
Thank you. Yeah, you can move on to the next slide. Thanks. So I'm Jen Lammy. I am the Associate Director of Sustainability at Emerson College. You can go to the next slide. Just as a bit of background about Emerson, we are an arts and communications focused college with a grounding in the liberal arts. We are located right downtown in Boston off the Common, and we have about 5,500 total students, including distance students and graduate students, with about 3,000 living on our campus in Boston across 5 residence halls. We do also have a small campus in Los Angeles and a study abroad facility in the Netherlands, but this planning has been focused on Boston. And we have about 20 different buildings in Boston that we either own or lease some space in. As an institution, we have a School of the Arts, which has film, performing arts, creative writing, a School of Communications, an Institute for the Liberal Arts, which is where our sort of interdisciplinary studies come in. And then we also have the Office of the Arts, which manages the professional programming of a couple of our theaters, including the Paramount and the Majestic Theater downtown, manages film screenings, all of that sort of more public-facing arts work, and has some sort of online resources as well. And one note about us as an institution is that we do have a new president who will begin leading the college on June 1st of this year. Next slide. So we actually do have some history of sustainability work at Emerson. So we came into this process in from a bit of a different perspective than some of the higher ed institutions and cultural institutions who are sort of just making their earliest commitments to sustainability. Way back in '96, we had students really begin to mobilize on sustainability that was focused on recycling primarily. But in 2007 is really when our leadership started making a significant commitment to climate. So that's when we signed what's known as the President's Climate Commitment. That's organizations, presidents of colleges will sign this commitment to basically being carbon neutral by a certain year. So we signed that in 2007 to be carbon neutral by 2030, along with hundreds of other higher ed institutions who chose the year that made sense for them for carbon neutrality. A couple years after that, we did publish our first climate action plan. We have not published one since then, and that plan was written for us by an external consultant. So it was kind of an emissions baseline and basically a list of steps to take to get us towards neutrality. All of those steps, which we have taken over the years, but there's still a lot more to do to get us to neutrality. We've had full-time sustainability staff since 2013, always just one at a time. And in 2016, we added, there's basically a second component of the President's Climate Commitment, which was really to think about resilience as well on our campus and think about how we can actually handle the impacts of climate change that are already happening. And then finally, in 2022, just last year, we started building this new sustainability action plan. We're going a bit broader than just climate action plan. And we are, of course, doing that as part of this collaborative climate action planning cohort. Next slide. So we really tried to expand sort of what we were thinking of as fitting within our climate action plan and really broaden it to this sustainability plan. So the way that our groups functioned was we had an emissions group, a resilience group, a climate justice group, all of which are kind of standard in these planning processes. But then we also added in a group focused on waste, which goes kind of beyond climate in some ways, a group focused on curriculum because we really wanted to make sure as a higher ed institution that we were reflecting this value of sustainability through how we're actually teaching and engaging with our students in the classroom. And then a group focused on finance because we, as a higher ed institution, the places where we put our money, whether it's through purchasing investments, retirement fund options for our employees, all really impact our ability to contribute to the sustainable future that aligns with our values. Throughout the whole process, we have had an advisory council that's made up of both internal leaders to the college. We had a few people at the President's Council level, so vice presidents at the college, a few other people who lead important divisions. For example, our housing director was part of that group. And then we also had a member of our board in that group and a few alums who are working sort of in the sustainability space or tangential to it and who had some kind of experience with sustainability at Emerson. And then finally, we are bringing everything that we're planning is basically going to be a proposal to our college leadership. So there is some overlap between that advisory council and our full president's council, but the goal is to have that president's council be fully supportive and invested in a final plan for implementation. Next slide. So as Dallase said before, we are kind of at the point of graduating from the collaborative climate action planning cohort, but we are probably at about the halfway point of getting ourselves to implementation. A big part of that is what I mentioned earlier, that we have a leadership transition happening at Emerson. So we have a new president starting in just a few weeks, and we really want to give that new leader time to both understand our current baseline of sustainability performance and also feel that they're able to sort of put their own twist on our sustainability planning and really make sure that everything we do has this sort of top-down buy-in and leadership. So we have gone through the entire process of basically developing a draft plan, but we're at the point now where we are pulling together sort of the parts that those 6 different working groups I mentioned all drafted and bringing them together into something cohesive that we will then work with our leadership on moving forward. And as I mentioned, our original 2009 climate action plan was written by an external consultant. It was, you know, sort of a standard document of basically to-do list for us, which helped us get through that first phase. But getting to this next level, we really wanted it to be a very community-based process, which being part of this cohort really helped. And we, as you can see on this chart, really took a lot of extra steps to engage our community through updates, through listening sessions, through options for submitting comments all along the process, in addition to having individuals from across the college be part of our working groups. Next slide. So we, at this point, have our 6 working groups have developed goals and really concrete strategies. Among those 6 working groups, we had about 40 individuals from staff, faculty, and students. So a really good range of sort of tenure at the college, focus, a really good representation across the college. Those 6 groups have come up with 9 total goals. So most of them have had one goal, but our curriculum group has 3 separate goals just based on, you know, how broad that topic is. And our waste group has come up with 2 separate goals, one focused on reducing our total amount of waste and one focused on diverting as much of the waste that we do produce from going to the trash. And overall, we have 24 unique strategies that slot into those goals. Most of them will support one specific goal, but we do have a few strategies that will actually support multiple goals through sort of one larger program. Next slide. So the cohort participation was really essential for us to get this done. Not only was it just, you know, having sort of a place to be every month and check in with the rest of the group, but that having the concrete resources really helped us make this process as community-based as possible. So we had all of these different ways of pulling in different ideas. This image here is just one of the jam boards that we use. This is a tool that basically allowed us in our meetings where we'd have, you know, 8 or 9 or 10 different people with all these different disparate ideas to take those, collect them together, and then have ways to basically turn those ideas into a starting point for the next meeting. I'm sure we've all been part of strategic planning processes where you kind of, everyone is brainstorming ideas and then you get to the next meeting and everyone kind of starts brainstorming from the start again. But having this process really made us continue to progress and continue to sort of make our ideas more tangible as we went. And another part that was helpful was because we started sort of at a different moment in our process, we had a bit of a history coming into this. We were able to sort of jump ahead a bit in the process. We already had our baselining done. So we were able to use the agendas, the facilitation training, all of these different resources to basically keep the momentum going on our end and not basically wait to sort of keep our timing aligned with all the other institutions involved. So having those materials and having the training to basically sort of be empowered to do this on our own was really essential. Next slide. So I'll just finish up by giving a bit of a preview of where we're headed next with this. As I mentioned, we have a team now drafting a cohesive plan out of all the various goals and strategies presented by our working groups. We are working on figuring out what the sort of budget and staffing resources needed to basically make our plan happen. And then we'll be working with our leadership to really move towards implementation. So that's it from me. Thank you.
All right, we good to go? All right, so hi trustees, I'm Josh Meyer. I'm curator of horticulture and sustainability at Zoo New England, which oversees both Franklin Park and Stone Zoos. We have Franklin Park Zoo, which is a 72-acre site nestled in Boston's historic Franklin Park, long considered the crown jewel of Frederick Law Olmsted's Emerald Necklace Park. And then we have Stone Zoo, which is located on a 26-acre site near the Spot Pond Reservoir in Stoneham, Massachusetts. Our mission, so Zoo New England mission, is to inspire people to protect and sustain the natural world for future generations by creating fun and engaging experiences that integrate wildlife and conservation programs, research and education. So I'm a very purpose-driven person, and I'm very proud and honored to be part of an organization that has a mission rooted in these values. So every year we see over 1 million guests come through our gates to see the work in action. So next slide. Next slide. So when this opportunity with the Green Ribbon Commission became available to participate in the collaborative climate action planning process, this was a no-brainer for us to join given our mission. This call to action slide on the screen has been recycled from one of our earlier meetings with the GRC, and it really illustrates how imperative climate action is for us to address. I think a lot of organizations at first may not think about how climate action affects their organization, but I can promise you that the collaborative climate action process will certainly help you find your call to action that's very impactful to your organization. At the zoo, our living collections are greatly impacted by climate change. So many sources explored in the cohort shows us that climate controlled facilities will be critical for the thermal comfort of our animals. This is just with the onset of hotter nights, warmer days, and other extreme weather. We have over 75 barns and buildings, and many are not fully climate controlled yet, but with extreme weather, we'll need to invest a lot more money for more robust infrastructure if used more frequently. So this program is giving us data to support future planning needs. Second, as one of the larger attractions in the area, we have a huge impact and a real opportunity to share our values in conservation and sustainability with our community and community base. And there's many environmental justice opportunities for us to focus on too that will also enhance both our organization and our neighbors. So this GRC program helped us really understand how we can broaden our impact as well as our outreach. And then looking at our organization from a facilities management perspective, we're looking to build a new visitor, build a new animal hospital, and several new exhibits requiring robust climate control. So we also have quite a bit of aging systems. So it's imperative that we think more about our long-term energy needs for good planning. So I'll talk a little more about this one later. And then also one point I was hoping to cover too is the theme of perseverance. So which is essentially persistence and kind of doing something despite difficulty or delay. And so while our organization is close to wrapping up a very impactful climate action plan for submittal as part of this process, we almost dropped out of the cohort last summer. So we almost dropped out. And this happened because our director of facilities initially led this process with Z&E last summer, but ended up leaving his job a few months later. So almost 3 months went by where our organization was not participating in the collaborative climate action process. So fortunately, I was hired late October of last year, joined the organization. And because I was the zoo's first position dedicated to sustainability, I jumped in to pick off where my predecessor left off. And I'm not going to lie, it certainly was a challenge to try to jump back into a program after this 3-month break, but I can say it's doable and worth the effort. Out of all my departmental and organizational goals I was looking to achieve in my first year, I'm continually seeing that this program, completing this program, and having that climate action plan deliverable is one of my highlights. So given that experience and sharing with you our call to action, I can now say that bad timing is simply not a good excuse for not engaging in this program. Now is always the right time. So all of the goal setting and project planning and facilities work and community building and partnership work you do will be greatly enhanced by the creation of a climate action plan. So next slide. So next, I'll say that going through the collaborative climate action planning process connects you with a lot of data and resources to help you better understand your organization in the context of climate and its many challenges. If your organization is very data-driven, then this program is definitely for you. There's access to interactive maps, statistics, great case studies, and then just good guidelines and sample reports. So this is just another recycled slide that kind of shows some of this in action. Additionally, I think whoever participates in this process is going to learn a lot and will be presented with tons of learning and knowledge sharing opportunities. So while I have a graduate degree in sustainability and find the topic of climate action planning really exciting and necessary, I just like to also reassure the group that special training or knowledge in climate action planning is not required. Instead, I think those who will be most successful with this will have great interpersonal skills. So if you know someone in your organization who is a super connector and excels in bringing people together, sharing ideas, making connections, and connecting concepts to different disciplines in your organization, then you should recommend them for this role. As an example of this, we are seeing immediate benefits and returns from this training and process as we learn more about how climate action might align with other organizations. So we have an amazing volunteer program here and work with a lot of corporate groups to host them at the zoo for service days, where they assist us with furthering our mission. So these are mainly horticulture and landscaping projects. Many of these corporate groups approach us and invite us to apply as a host site for their service days in exchange for funds to cover work such as buying trees for tree planting. In the past, they were not always particular with specific workday goals and outcomes, but now we're seeing these groups are really upping their criteria for site selection and giving the highest preference for service day projects to those that include outcomes in environmental justice and community health and resiliency. And so now because I went through the climate action planning process, I can confidently write project proposals that address these concerns. So already this season, corporate service days are giving us an estimated $5,000 to plant $5,000 worth of trees that are selected to sequester carbon better, while also contributing to the concept of a food forest in the Dorchester community, where planting fruit and nut trees that are also native to the area. And then additionally, last fall, we were invited to apply for a $10,000 grant with a local corporation to help our organization make progress on climate resiliency or adaptation measures. And because I was in place and it was known by zoo staff that I was doing sustainability and resiliency work with the GRC, our grants department connected with me and we were able to craft a very compelling application that could make a big impact. And so we ended up winning this grant, and we're now using the funds to hire a leading sustainability firm to help us identify a pathway to net zero emissions, which is going to lead to lower utility bills and more savings. And so to sum up this slide, I just say that that doing this program will empower you with information to get you more grants, get you more funding, and more audiences to make bigger impacts and contributions to your surrounding communities and therefore your organization. Next slide. And then I just wanted to also give you some additional selling points on why you should join this program with the GRC. So not only will you be on your way to developing a roadmap to reducing your carbon footprint, identifying climate threats that may impact your continuity of business operations, as well as becoming better neighbors, but you'll also make progress on just developing a general sustainability program for your organization. So in the past, we've had a rather informal sustainability program here. We do pursue really worthy initiatives such as working towards electrifying our fleet and adding solar and instituting recycle initiatives, but it was not really integrated into a larger plan that demonstrated our true needs and problems that were most worthy of solving. So fortunately, I think the climate action plan we're finding created in this process, it really truly aids in this process by outlining our greatest challenges, which in turn helps with decision making. So another point too is just a social capital and access. So in this program, you'll be connected to an incredible knowledge bank of architects, engineers, sustainability experts, and these are professionals who are solving a lot of the important challenges for climate. And the cool thing is that they're free. They're at our disposal for free. So it's just amazing to have that knowledge bank available. And then the cohort is also just been another powerful network, I think, as others mentioned too, just a place for partnerships and idea sharing. And I just had some really great conversations with my peers here that led to some great ideas. And then next slide. And then just so in a nutshell, I can say, without a doubt that the collaborative climate action planning process is just a highly valuable program that will elevate how your organization thinks about, what their role is in making Boston a cleaner, safer, and more connected city. I recommend selecting someone in your organization who is a super connector for partnerships and has big ideas. And I welcome anyone in the Zoom session to reach out to me anytime if they'd like to learn more about my experience or to help you better understand your suitability for this program. So with that, that's my time. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Paula Polito. I'm the Vice President of Facilities and Building Operations here at the Museum of Science. And we can jump to the next slide. So just a little bit about the Museum of Science. We know that science and technologies is shaping our lives. And here at the museum, we want to strive to equip and inspire everybody to use science for the global good. And being one of the largest science centers in the world and one of New England's most attended cultural institutions, we engage about nearly 5 million people a year, about 1.5 million here at Science Park, in museums around the world through our traveling exhibits and in classrooms. And one of the benefits of COVID for us is our digital reach. We now actually, when I say we reach 5 million people with our digital reach, we're now reaching 35 million people this year through our different programs. And you sort of look at the background there, our unique location, we connect Boston and Cambridge. So it puts us at the junction of some of the world's most influential academic institutions, industries, local and state governments, schools, and the public. And so we take it serious since we're trusted by each sector. We're ideally positioned to convene, inspire, and create meaningful experiences for all. And so as we jump into the next slide, and we think about climate change, we recognize that climate change and environmental sustainability are among the greatest challenges that we're facing in humanity today. So we start with that basic tenet. If we jump to the next slide, we look at 4 tenets that we spotlight, and one of them is mitigation. And so we are committed to developing net zero greenhouse gas emissions prior to 2050. The next tenet, if we jump to the next slide, is about go back one more. Resiliency. We know that resiliency is a big part of this. It's not just about greenhouse gas reduction. It's also about resiliency to make sure that we safeguard our facilities and grounds and reduce the demands that are placed on different emergency services, allowing for those services to be used for others in our community. The next tenet we spotlight, if we jump to the next slide, is our education and outreach. And really what we're going to do is, as cultural institutions, what we can do, and as educational institutions, what we can do that other buildings in Boston can't do is shine a spotlight on the climate crisis. And we do that through a series of experiences that I'll talk about in a little bit more. And if we jump to the next slide, our other tenet is climate justice, right? We know that our operations contribute to emissions and that adversely affects underserved members in those communities. And we also want to make sure that we can try and do a little bit more than that. So if we jump to the next slide. Oops. We talk about resiliency. We need to prepare the museum for climate change, right? So we're looking at things like changes in temperatures, sea level rise, unpredictable weather patterns. We can go to the next slide. And one of the things that we like to make sure we think about, right, if you look, we are on the Charles River. We are not right on the ocean, but the Charles River goes to the ocean. So we think about sea level, but we also think about stormwater management in a way that we never thought about before. And we're seeing that. I continually think about how a hurricane that hit Louisiana drops 10 inches of rain in New Jersey. Always thought about New Jersey maybe coming up the coast and hitting it, but coming across the country and doing that and the devastation that has. So if you jump to the next slide, we're starting to look at different things like as we re-envision our plaza, can we re-envision how the front of the museum is to create more greenscaping, to do better on stormwater management, to stop infiltration into the building, but also collect that sediment before it hits our rivers and streams. So as we look at resiliency, stormwater management is one of the bigger tenets we're starting to look at as well. If we jump to the next slide, when we think about mitigation, again, we want to try and get to carbon neutral by 2050, and we can jump ahead one more slide. And sort of what that looks like. So here's the chart. We fall into the assembly category. We have targets across the years set by Boston. You can see that we're doing pretty well on that for Boston. But it's funny, Boston and Cambridge do it differently. So we have to actually report to both Boston and to Cambridge, and we have to hit the more stringent of the two. So for Boston, we're doing pretty well. We just finished calendar year 2022 at 7.7, and the goal for 2025 was 7.8. We had done a lot of early adaptations to the building in my time here. That actually penalized us a little bit in Cambridge because Cambridge does it differently. They take your 2018 and 2019 and say, you got to get 80%. So had you done a little bit less early, that would be easier to do. If you're further ahead, that's a little bit harder to do. So you can see we're really well positioned for 2025 to 2029 to hit the targets for Boston, but not so well for Cambridge. So we have work to do there. And if we jump to the next slide, one of the things that we're highlighting in our work is building envelopes. And here's just one little example of something we're looking at. We're going to renovate one of our live animal garden exhibits. And right now it's a glass sloped wall section. And historically, we probably would have replaced it in kind. And now as we think about it more, we're saying, can we really live without the top sloped glass section and do a traditional roof with higher insulation? And we've been doing Code Plus insulation on our roofs for quite a while now. And triple pane glass, thermally broken. But by doing that, that one little space, which isn't so little, couple thousand square feet, we're going to save about 72% of our energy. This is in addition to all the things that we all look at in terms of energy conservation, more efficient units. We're going to be taking a better look on all of our units for energy recovery. So doing all the mechanical things we're looking at, but really, really making sure that we also focus on our building envelope because there's a lot to do there. As we jump to the next slide and we talk about our education outreach. So again, we want to shine a spotlight on the climate crisis. I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly because they build upon each other. So we jump to the next one. We want people to learn about the impacts of climate change that they have on human and natural systems. And not only that, but about different possible solutions that we can build upon. We jump to the next slide. We also want our visitors to consider the perspectives of others and how different mitigation and resilience strategies could negatively or positively affect them. And as we continue on to the next slide, we want them to become more, really the goal is we want them to become more confident taking actions and discussing climate change with their friends and family. And we can jump one more slide. And we're hoping that these experiences will not only affect the individuals who take part, but also the broader community by providing common experiences that facilitate and initiate new conversations. And I got to tell you that our education department is knocking it out of the park. I was actually here this Saturday volunteering. We did a Rise Up Boston weekend. And so we do a typical discussion about climate change. And in this particular presentation, our learning and research group did all the hard work. They did the presentation, and then we broke it up into segments where I would then jump in for 2 minutes, sort of talk about the things we talked about here and how what we do here at the museum, but how can they can then take that to the house. So I talked to them about our building envelope and better insulated glass and windows and roofings, but also, hey, how would that affect you in your house? And talking to them about how if it's cold outside, if you can stop the cold from coming in, you're lowering your heating usage. And same with electricity. So just trying to talk to them about things like that so they can take it home. So taking what we do here at the museum and how they can translate that to their home. And then the other piece that I wanted to talk about a little bit on the next slide is just climate justice. And, obviously the better we can do, the better we help serve the community. But if we look at the next slide, there's things that we're looking at. Again, making sure that our exhibits and programs give people a better understanding will help. We'll look at things like our endowment and our investment strategies with our finance team, and what are we doing, and are we doing responsible things there? In a longer term, as we make our building more resilient and stronger, could we become a cooling center or a heating center or a place of refuge? And then looking about our energy procurement, for the last 7 or 8, maybe even 10 years, we've been buying wind power from wind farms out in the Midwest, but is that really the best way to do that? And so, if we jump to the next slide, in closing, I'll say we we look at a lot of things. We want to make sure that we don't just look at energy reduction, we look at our building envelope. We want to make sure that we're actually a voice to the community, that they can ask questions, they can learn about new technologies. And I think that's where our cultural institutions and educational institutions set apart from other buildings in Boston and in our region. And I think we need to continue to look at sort of how we can mitigate different effects and how we purchase things, that being whether it's our investments, but also our energy strategies. So with that, I want to be conscious of time and turn it back over to Dallase, and thank you.
Paul, thank you so much. And thank you to Jen and Josh and Ben for also presenting. It's just so fun to see the amount of work that you're able to do at your organization. And Paul, it's fun to see those, sticky note Jamboard ideas turning into actual plans, like with your stormwater management and things like that. It's very exciting. So I'm going to be brief here in talking about the theory of change and how it relates to this program. My background is psychology and behavioral change, and I was specifically interested in my graduate work that we can all have good intention, but there are barriers for us saying we want to do something versus actually taking action and moving ourselves individually, but also our organizations forward. So next slide, please. I like looking at this behavior elements, these icons here, because at the end of the day, it's more than just wanting to do it. We have all these other things that can be in our way, and if they are there in supporting our effort, we're more likely to succeed in changing our behavior and our organizational behavior. But if there's barriers in the way, we're less likely to do that. So do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the knowledge? Do we have the financing? Are we going against the flow? Do we have the time? Is it part of our routine? And what's the actual physical effort in doing that? So if I go to the next slide here, one of the things that I find are out there is a lot of how-tos, right? In working with John and Amy out of the gate, we could point to dozens of resources that brought you through a planning process, and you just would have to read it. It's a handful of pages. It had really great best practices, but that's just one of the behavior elements that need to be in place for you to succeed. So my work really was taking the behavior change theory piece and recognizing in order for our organizations to be successful, we need to go beyond just saying, hey, here's this resource. We need to help reduce these other barriers to change. If you go to the next slide. That's sort of where the GRC came in. And yes, we still have the resources for you, but we also had this like personal trainer model. I got to be like a personal trainer for climate action planning, where there's a group you show up with, you're held accountable for your steps, you're given the tools and resources, you don't have to figure it out on your own, and we make it fun. At least I think we made it fun. I had fun. And we bring people through together. So we'll go through a couple of those pieces now. Next slide, please. So user-friendly framework, really, we wanted to reduce the barrier of it being just like an overload, information overload. We tried to give bite-sized pieces when you need it. We didn't, yes, people had access to as much resources as they wanted, like Jen mentioned, if she was ahead of the game, but really we gave bite-sized pieces as they needed it. We tried to give space within the meetings for people to do work in that space. We made it part of a routine of monthly meetings, and we had our technical experts to actually support the physical effort of figuring out how you do a greenhouse gas emissions process, right? So how do we reduce those pieces? Next slide. We also curated these best practices and tools for you. I'm sure if you did a Google search, you could find, multiple different templates for doing a greenhouse gas emissions, or different strategies in thinking about how to think about resilience within your space. But we took the time in setting up this program to hand pick the things that really make sense, that are place-based for Boston, and brought them to the group, again, with our content experts, providing an anchor so people could latch on and understand why this was important. Next slide. Also, capacity building. This is something that I know Jen mentioned, but in order for this to be successful, it has to live within the organization. So every person who is a part of this program, they are given a facilitation training, something that I provide through my organization. And also they are given the templates to create change in our sessions. They have time to ask questions on how to use them in our sessions. And then they get to test them out at the organization and come back with additional questions and iterations and edits to it. So it's not just someone coming in and doing it for you. They have to develop the capacity within the organization. So when it's actually time to implement, that the key people to implement are already doing the work. And that is key to have a successful program for any strategy that you're doing in your organization. Next slide. And then it's engagement focused. And I think I've many times I've seen organizations that have like a rock star person, they do all the work, or they hire an external consultant that does all the work, and there is just no buy-in at the end of the day. The people who are absolutely necessary to do the work, to implement it, to invest their finances, to think through it, they have no fingerprints on that plan. It does not belong to them. So right out of the gate, one of the things we tell all our organizations would be like, I would tell Josh, this can't be Josh's plan. It has to be Zoo New England's plan, right? And you're able to see, especially through Ben and Jen's visuals, that they really reached out to ensure and had conversations across the organizations to ensure that at the end of the day, people see themselves in it. I know Paul and Josh, through their presentations in the past, they're being looked at as people to reach out to and to help develop other programs with that focus in mind. So I highly recommend thinking about the engagement, because the planning process at the end of the day can be more important than that plan. So if you skip over the planning process and the engagement, you just have a document that gathers dust and that doesn't actually lead to change. Next slide. And then finally, at the end of the day, you get to celebrate. We get to, most of it was Zoom, but here's all of us at the Museum of Fine Arts at the end of last year's cohort. It's a great time to celebrate. We actually get to bring our alumni back and celebrate this year's cohort with our green ribbon cutting ceremony. So I highly recommend you take part. We can drop the link again. I want to give plenty of time for Q&A. And we'll just end on this one last slide here. Just a reminder that, climate change is bigger than any of us. And it really is going to require collaboration as the model for change. So this really has been fun to take that idea of collaboration to an extreme and to see just how much it has benefited not only our participants in it, but also we have coaches like Gwill and others, and our content experts who show up and are excited because they really feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. So with that, let's open it up for questions. And thank you all for participating and for sharing your stories today.
Well, thank you, everybody. That was great. I loved hearing your stories. I love the diversity of the organizations represented. And thank you, Gwill and Dallase, for being our fearless leaders. We have a few questions from the audience. I welcome more questions. Please put them in the chat. Some are coming in on the Q&A. The chat's a little easier for us, but either way, it works. And let me start with something that I think is just probably something that a lot of people think and they don't really ask. So I appreciate the person who asked this. And he said, well, how do we evaluate the effectiveness of these ideas to actually get to or to achieve emissions reductions? And, you know, how do you know? What if there's a great quote here. You know, I'm a bit concerned about developing a huge complex plan to carry out something that has really never been done before. So what gives you the confidence to move forward? And this is an engineer asking, remember. Anyone want to take that on? Paul?
Yeah, sure. I can start on that a little bit. I guess part of it is not being afraid to fail. We've done a lot of different projects here at the museum, some that have had some great benefits and some that didn't, even going back before we see it. You know, we've always thought about reduction, but, you know, we've done building integrated wind turbines here at the museum. In fact, it's kind of a weird one. We actually did a study that said, we're not a good site for building integrated wind turbines. But to jump on your point a little bit, we actually got a grant to continue with it. And the reasoning being that we could actually help educate other people on what works and what doesn't work. And that's just as valuable. And it kind of made me scratch my head because I think it was like my first year here saying, why would I want to do that? And their theory was, we'd rather you do it once than 50 or 60 other buildings do it and not have it work. But we shared our wind studies to show people how it might work and where it would work and where it wouldn't work. We've tried things like, waterless urinals, and we've figured out where they work and where they don't work so well. So we're not afraid to fail. Obviously, we want to learn from that. We want to learn as much as we can before there. We're looking at things like right now in terms of, we have some PV, but we're looking for solar thermal for some of our heating, and we'll do a pilot project on that on one of our units to see how effective that really is. Learn from some others, but we definitely share that as well. But I guess we can't be afraid to succeed. And our plan is a whole bunch of different increments that will sort of build upon each other. And I think one of the most interesting things for us is figuring out where district steam falls into the whole thing. So we've been on the Veolia district steam for a while now. This was a big learning experience for me. It seemed like a great thing at the time. They were taking heat, they were dumping it into the river from the production. They were going to turn that into steam. We could buy that steam. 75 to 85% of it would be waste steam. We thought it was great. We decommissioned our on-site boiler plant. We converted over. In the 5 years after that, every year over year, we dropped our steam usage by MMBTUs. So we think this is great, this is great. And when you put all of that into Energy Star, district steam is, I'll use the word taxed, and that's the wrong word, so I apologize, but district steam usage by Energy Star is taxed at a higher differential than the natural gas I bring in to generate my own steam. So even though our MMBTUs went down, our greenhouse gas emissions, theoretically, according to Energy Star, did go way up because they couldn't differentiate that district steam plant from any other district steam plant. So we're really watching as they convert that whole plant over to electricity. How does that benefit? How does that not benefit? And is that really the way we want to get to carbon neutral? But we want to do both. We want to use green energy sources, but we want to reduce. So I guess that's a long way of saying is some of these things are not going to work as you intend, but we can't be afraid to try, because if we do, we'll just never get there. Not sure if others.
Paul,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
Oh,
Dallas.
just at the highest level too. That's one of the benefits of this cohort is like, you're going to have stories from folks like Paul, and we also have our content expertise who have worked on dozens, they've been in the industry for 15 years. They've been a part of, or they've seen the failures. And I think the final piece that I would say is we really focus on the goals over tactics. Each of the cohort members are listing out number of strategies to go through that are all more programmatic and bite-sized, and recognizing that you might go a couple of feet down a pathway and need to pivot, but you already have another list of strategies you can try out. So, I think it's making sure that, yes, this endeavor is huge because needing to change, adapt your organization, but under the shell of that is bite-sized implementable pieces that you can take on one at a time.
Can I will just say, and maybe Ben would elaborate on this, but I was in a meeting last week with some very large, very sophisticated energy users in the city of Boston, talking about how they have reduced their greenhouse gas footprints by, 60% in one case, 30% in another case over 2008. And efficiency is the #1 strategy. Before electrification, before procuring green energy, efficiency. And you can get so much mileage right there. And we know that works. That's proven over and over again. And I think, Ben, I sort of had the impression that was really where you started across the board on your portfolio.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna mention this, which because I saw one of the other questions floating around. But that said, you don't have to start with fancy equipment that you don't understand. For us, probably the first step is going to be, energy efficiency, weatherization activities. Are we approaching our buildings in a way to actually make them kind of use energy as efficiently as possible? And my organization, we're a preservation organization, and we did a project 10 years ago where we actually had Department of Energy resource money to reduce energy usage 50% at one of our sites. It's a big site used for functions and a lot of different things. It was an energy hog. And but we said everyone else was talking about ripping the walls off and re-insulating everything, and we said that's not what we do. We do preservation work. And so we approached the house in a very sensitive way to the historic material, and still achieved the 50% drop in energy. And actually, we had baselining done 2 years ago as we participated in Culture Over Carbon program. We did some baselining for 10 of our sites. And that site is actually performing, if you look at the standards for emission rates, is actually performing at 2040 to 2050 goals. And so we know proof of concept that this can work, that it's not all about the equipment, it's about, how you approach your buildings. And we know that preservation can still coexist with this world of kind of carbon neutral. It's not going to be easy. It's getting that last step to zero is going to be quite hard, but we know it's effective.
Yeah, I think when you're out there on the margins, and this may be closer to where you are now, Paul, it gets tougher, but getting started is there's a lot of proven technology and even just common sense that can be applied. So moving on in our questions, question about staff. So you all touched on it a little bit, but what kind of staff is necessary to advance the work? And I have a related question, which is how is the process of undertaking this cohort sort of, if it has it changed your staff relationships at all? Has it affected the culture of your institution? Whoever wants to take that on is welcome.
I can start and then others can fill in. But for us, I would say the really important thing for us, and I brought this up and I know Dallase mentioned it, is making sure that others see sustainability as part of their jobs. So, you know, a lot of institutions, higher ed and cultural, have one or more, or sometimes fewer full-time sustainability staff members. And I think you can certainly still do a lot of this work with 0 people who have a, you know, full-time focus on this. Obviously, you need the commitment to, you know, come to these meetings and pursue the program and be sort of the central coordinator. But what we found is that getting the right buy-in, especially from a leadership level, helps people to integrate this stuff into their day-to-day jobs. So we have someone in our finance department, one of the leaders of our finance team, is very committed to this work and has done a really great job throughout this process of being involved in the planning and having members of his team be part of our finance working group, really helping those team members, even before we've gotten to implementation on this, start figuring out what conferences they need to go to understand sustainable procurement, what they need to do on a daily basis. So it really can be, with the right leadership, which is the real caveat, incorporated into a lot of different staff members. Of course, there's, you know, if you want to do a lot of day-to-day programming, educational stuff, I rely a lot on a student staff for that. And there's, you know, certainly a need for support in these things, but I don't think that lacking sort of a big, robust sustainability staff from the start should stop one from planning. And I think also sometimes you don't know what you need in terms of that staff until you go through a planning process. So it's helpful to at least start and figure that out, and not sort of be stuck in this point of not having the staff and also not knowing what you need.
And I would say we're kind of a case in point where we talked about getting grant funding for a sustainability coordinator, but as Dallase knows, that person didn't start until March. We did all the work ourselves and got us to a point where we have a draft climate action plan. Now the coordinator is helping just keep us moving, but it's still going to be the power of that staff advisory group that keeps us actually alive. And that was the critical aspect. Not just because we have this person doesn't mean the plan lives. It's got to be buy-in and continual buy-in and continual discussion to make sure it does become, one of our goals is a day-to-day part of our institution. And so we really have to work to make sure that's going to happen. And we're laying the groundwork now for all of that.
Yeah, and just to add on to Jennifer and Ben, I mean, if you're concerned about time, so I run the horticulture program and the sustainability program here as in New England, and sustainability should really only be about 15% of my role, but you know, I still make it happen. It's I think with this particular program, I just kind of invested about 2 to 3 hours a week on this. And then I think as I mentioned in my kind of presentation, I think making sure you find someone who has the soft skills and connecting and communicating with people, the right people to make sure that your message gets spread throughout your organization is key. So if you're meeting monthly with this larger group and you're doing, you know, a couple hours a week to make sure that this information is being disseminated and distributed to your group, and you're making those key decisions that are, you know, being brought forth from the monthly or, you know, bi-monthly cohort sessions, then I think you'll be fine.
Let me ask you also from the board perspective, or from your perspective working with your board, have there been moments where the board has intervened in a very positive way? Have there been moments when you wish you had different engagement with your board? What's that been like?
Oh gosh,
I can say for,
I know nobody wants to
go
throw
ahead.
their board under the bus. I understand that. However, let me rephrase. What role has your board played in supporting the work, moving it along, and where you know, and where do you think that's a crucial for board members who are listening who haven't really engaged in this work? What would you advise that they do to be supportive?
I think, and as you saw in my presentation, it hasn't actually gone to the full board yet in my organization, but we're a large organization. We kind of crank away at the staff level for a really long time before things bubble up. That being said, it was critical for me, I felt, to get to that buildings and grounds committee early on, because this is what's going to be driving some of the decisions we make for budgeting and all of that moving forward. So I kind of handpicked who I was going to talk to, but that's what good board management is all about, right? Staff managing up as well as boards managing down. So, but I knew my chair was going to be, the chair of that committee was going to be on board. But I made sure he was, on board, but he's very excited, and he's the one that embraced it and said, and I knew he was going to be my kind of voice on the board. Yes, I'll present, but then he's going to be the one. So I was kind of approaching it as, this is important. I know he knows it's important, but I'm going to make sure he knows why it's important, and continue to kind of work that relationship just to make sure that we have the full buy-in. So that's a staff perspective on board management.
Yeah, that's helpful.
I think the other thing, I think one of the other things to think about too, and we had an advantage when we first started delving into this. Gwill was the chair of our board. So that was a good first step, but it's really about us making sure that our board is, and just raising that level of awareness, right? They're focused on a lot of different things. I sort of feel like it's our job to raise the level of awareness to the board. And what we've been doing is we've sort of been building it together, that it's about upgrading our building infrastructure, which for us, a lot of it is very old. And you get the added benefit of making the building more resilient and be able to meet the needs of the museum, but also to reduce our carbon footprint. But, be prepared. It is daunting as we start to go forward with people and start talking about large sums of money. It can be a little daunting. So I think it's a gradual progress of raising the level of awareness and making sure that they understand the problem. Because if your board doesn't understand the problem, they can't help solve the problem.
Well,
and I can add too that just when we put together our call to action, there's just so many elements that really challenged our continuity of operations. So whether it be the climate control features we needed, and potential disasters and events and flooding, these were elements that people in my larger climate team were really interested in. And once I started presenting those, our COO, who's part of the group, he said, wow, we need to get this to the board ASAP, so they can really see how this can be a potential tool for problem solving. And so I'll be presenting to our board, I think later this spring, because or this summer, because we recognize that this is addressing so many of our institutional problems.
I think that getting organized for climate action does pull on so many pieces of the organization, so many skills, so many departments need to be involved, that I know some people say, well, being prepared for climate or sustainability is just almost a proxy for good management in general, because we're looking at risk and we're addressing it from multiple different sources. So I think we're getting close to the end here. It's almost the top of the hour. Does anyone want to throw in a last thought that they haven't had time to share yet? And if you don't have one, let me plant the question of, what advice would you give to an organization that is sort of listening to all this and considering whether they might want to join the cohort in the fall of 2023?
I'll jump in as others are thinking about it. I think it was Josh said, now is a good time. There's nothing like now. And I think that this cohort is really an excellent opportunity. So if you are a board member, just ask the question at a board meeting and see what happens. And as Amy is so tired of me saying, audit committee, this is a risk. Any board should be feeling this deeply as a fiduciary responsibility for their buildings, for their collections, to not ask moment in 2023, especially if you're in Boston and have Berto or are in the state of Massachusetts or in Cambridge, poor Paul. You need to be addressing this right now. And we hope that that everyone on the call and all the organizations will eventually go through this planning, because it's been extraordinary to work with Dallase and the others. So I just encourage everyone to not be scared. It's challenging, and it's always better to go with a group when there's a lot of challenge ahead. So I would encourage people to really think about it. And Amy, you're off mute. Anyone else off mute? Dallase?
I'll let the others speak because they got to go through it.
Yeah,
I think I would.
Oops. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Sorry. Okay. I would just build on that by saying that, to reiterate, you don't need to have done anything yet to sort of start at this point. There's just the resources that are part of this program, the coaches, the technical experts, office hours all the time, like all of these ways that you can sort of get the support that you need. Don't feel like, oh, let me wait until I do a baseline assessment. Like, that's part of this. Everything is kind of built into the program, so you can just start wherever you are.
I would say, and don't be afraid. I mean, my organization is unwieldy at times, and our baselining isn't done. And that's okay. You know, we made it through this process. We still know that's still an action item to hit some of our goals, but it's a process. And I think Dallase put this in the chat also, and I mentioned it with the funder, which is it also just gives you the language to how you talk about it. And there is a lot of funding out there for people who can talk the talk. And so, you know, it's a wonderful opportunity to be walked through the process, end up with a deliverable, and, you know, kind of be able to move forward in this kind of crazy world that everyone is having trouble wrapping their heads around.
Well, thank you all for that. I know we could talk longer, but I'm going to respect people's time and let them get on to their 10 o'clocks. So Gwill and Dallase, thank you for leading us. Jen, Josh, Paul, Ben, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It was great to hear your stories, and thank you to the audience. We'll send you the link if you didn't get to hear the whole thing, and we'll talk to you all soon.